How can we better help support people flourish in this life? Many people ask the question, but do many people do something about it? That person to me is Karen Dobkins. Today, I will be specifically exploring how she spread mindfulness and well-being across UCSD's campus and made it a mission to put students' mental health at the forefront. Dr. Karen Dobkins earned her PhD in neurosciences at UCSD in 1992 and joined their Department of Psychology, where she's been an influential professor and mentor ever since. Her early research explored how infants perceive motion and contrast. Grounded in cognitive neuroscience, her work sought to understand the developing mind. Over time, her focus expanded from how we see to how we feel, connect, and flourish. This evolution led to her next chapter. As director of the Human Experience and Awareness Lab, the HEAL Lab, Dr. Dobkins now studies the science of living well, cultivating awareness, and nurturing compassion. One of her most meaningful contributions is Psych 88, Learning Sustainable Well-Being, a one-unit course helping students cultivate mindfulness, self-compassion, and resilience. As her teaching assistant, I saw how her classroom became a safe, transformative space where students learn not just information, but connection and care. In 2025, her well-being course expanded beyond the psychology department, a reflection of her persistence and her belief that compassion and mental health belong everywhere in academia. Beyond her professional life, Dr. Dobkins lives the values she teaches. She pursues yoga, photography, dance, and singing, practices that weave joy and mindfulness into her outside life. Her early foundation in neuroscience remains strong, but now she integrates, exploring not just what the brain does, but what it feels like to be human. Though she doesn't have a specific theoretical framework, she explained it over voice message to me a few days ago. Basically, she has this desire for mindfulness to be obvious to everyone, just like how people just automatically pick up their cell phones. In her TED Talk titled The Space Between Kansas and Oz, she describes the transition between the ordinary and the extraordinary, how mindfulness can help us inhabit the present moment, even amidst uncertainty. In one of her published research articles, Changing the Landscape of Mental Health Among College Students, she documents how her well-being course tangibly improved student mental health and resilience ever since COVID. If I had to describe Dr. Dobkins in a few words, I would say she is grounded, nurturing, empathetic, and growth-oriented. She brings a calm and centered energy, almost like mindfulness embodied. She creates spaces where students can open up and grow. She listens deeply and meets others where they are, and she models lifelong curiosity, reminding everyone that we are always learning and becoming. Dr. Karen Dobkins' story is really a story about well-being, how it begins with one person, moving outward through relationships, and eventually reshaping entire institutions. Her own mindfulness practice. Long before she taught it, she lived it. Her practice grounded her, shaped how she moved through the world, and eventually became the lens through which she saw her students. In Bronfenbrenner's terms, her personal microsystem was quietly setting the tone for every space she entered in academia. Those inner commitments naturally spilled into the learning environment she built. Her classrooms and labs became microsystems of their own, places where students didn't just learn about perception of the brain, but learned to perceive themselves with curiosity, compassion, and clarity. When these microsystems of personal practice and teaching practice met, they formed a mesosystem, a web of relationships where mindfulness wasn't an add-on, but a way of being together. Students noticed it. They softened, they opened. But her work was never about the room she was in. It grew in response to forces much larger than her. When COVID-19 hit, something shifted. Students were isolated, overwhelmed, and losing the human connection that makes learning possible. That historical moment, the Chronos system, changed the direction of her career. She saw how deeply students were struggling, and she recognized that the usual mental health supports weren't enough. They intervened only after students were already hurting. That gap, sitting just outside her direct control, is what Bronfenbrenner would call the ecosystem, structures that influence students but don't include them directly. So she did something bold. She built a new structure from the inside. Drawing from her mindfulness practice and years studying human development, she created a class in well-being, something UCSD had never seen before. At first, she taught it within psychology, creating a small but powerful microsystem of students learning to breathe, reflect, communicate, and care for themselves. The Ecosystem resisted at first. Getting a class like this approved wasn't simple, but she kept going. And the culture around her, the macro system, with its growing emphasis on inclusion, empathy, and mental health, began to shift in her favor after 2020. Mindfulness wasn't fringe anymore. It was becoming essential. As the culture changed, the university became more open to integrating mind-body well-being into academic life. In 2025, her class expanded to more departments, more faculty joined, more students were reached. A single microsystem on mindfulness grew into a campus-wide mesosystem of connection and student-teacher relationships within and across departments. What makes her story powerful is the way every system interacts. Her personal practice, microsystem, shaped her teaching. Her relationships with students, mesosystem, demonstrated the impact of mindful education. Institutional barriers, ecosystem, pushed her to innovate. Cultural values, macrosystem, amplified her efforts. A global crisis, chronosystem, redirected her purpose. Taken together, the trajectory of her career reveals one simple truth. Well-being in education doesn't come from one moment, one class, or one person. It emerges from the constant interaction of inner life, relationships, institutional structures, cultural values, and historical forces. So, what can we learn from Dr. Dobkins' journey, and how does it inform the field of school psychology? First, she bridges science and humanity. Her work reminds us that psychology isn't just about data, it's about people. Meaningful change doesn't come from ideas alone, but from the individuals who care enough to bring those ideas to life. Second, her mentorship style shows how relationships themselves can be healing. In school psychology, this suggests that supportive, empathetic educators and student relationships are as vital as formal interventions. Third, she models a growth mindset and lifelong learning. Her belief that there's always room to grow, even for experts, reinforces that both educators and students are co-learners in a shared process. And finally, she teaches us that meaningful change doesn't come from theory alone, but from embodied action. By creating courses, communities, and even physical spaces for well-being, she demonstrates how to turn compassion into culture. In summary, Dr. Dobkins' career tells a powerful story. She began as a neuroscientist studying how infants see and evolved into a scholar exploring how humans can truly flourish. Her work reflects the ecosystem of human growth, from individual perception to collective transformation. Through her teaching, her research, her mentorship, her way of being, she shows us that the most profound science of learning may be how to live well, with awareness, compassion, and connection.
And while we're talking about today, can you be grateful for who you are today? Can you end each day by saying, I'm continuing to move towards my goals and dreams, and I'm doing the best I can, and my best is always good enough. In fact, my best might be pretty damn amazing.